In this episode, we are talking to Max. Just so that the audience know a little bit about you, Max, can you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Sure, thanks for having me. I guess I should start with my background. I originally did physics, so I did a PhD in quantum information theory. But even during that time, I realized that, well, I wasn't a bad researcher, but I realized that I have other talents which are complementary. So really enjoyed the entrepreneurial side of things. I was very good at presenting things, I realized very early on. And I also co-founded a startup at the time. We were doing smart cooking apps, sort of AI-based cooking apps. It wasn't very successful in the end, but I learned a lot of things on the kind of entrepreneurial side. And through this, I decided that after my PhD, hey, actually, I think I want to go into a more applied side. I want to use my math skills to solve some real world problems. And at the time, AI and deep learning seemed like a really, really good topic to go into. I mean, it still is, but it was very early on in those days. And I thought, hey, that's a topic where I can use all my scientific skills, but actually work on real problems. So I did my PhD in London, but then I came to Tokyo and I joined an AI startup here I was mainly focused on natural language processing actually. So I led the development of a tool that was used by, for example, financial analysts to find insights in large amounts of news data and also other text applications. And for various reasons, I decided to change things up a little bit. And I think about a year and a half ago or so, I joined a friend's company doing something completely different. Still AI, but AI applied to art, creativity, and design. So I had been interested in the whole artistic side of things for a long time, and I've been doing side projects. I've been doing videos before, like music videos for bands. I'm myself actually a musician. I produce and perform. And I thought, okay, let's just give it a go and try and make my hobbies out of my full-time job and bring AI into this as well. And I've been working there for a year and a half, and it was a friend's company, so it was kind of like, okay, let's give it a go. And it was a really, really nice year. I learned a lot on this intersection of AI and art and design and creativity. Part of it was really commercial projects. So companies came to us saying, hey, can you solve this particular problem? So also consulting things like bigger companies coming to us and say, can you prepare our design teams for a future in which AI is going to be more and more embedded into the workflow? And the other half was really purely artistic projects. So we're working with artists, we're working with performers. You based in London, maybe you went to the exhibition AI More Than Human at the Barbican. We actually had a piece exhibited there, which is now traveling around the world. And yeah, those were the sort of things I was doing then. Also, at the same time, I've been writing for about 3-ish years now. And we're actually mainly articles about business culture and well, I guess people would call it work-life balance, but leadership, all these sort of things. And mainly they were for myself to process some things I was not so happy with at that first startup I joined. But more and more people started reading those articles, and eventually, through a very strange route of like random coincidences, I ended up writing a book together with a friend of mine on exactly this topic called, well, the book is called Time Off, a practical guide to building your rest ethic and finding success without distress. So that got published earlier this year. And also very recently, I took on a new position. So I'm now the R&D lead at a company called Bespoke. We're based here in Tokyo. And essentially, we're making chatbots for the travel industry, but also for crisis management. So, for example, one of our big clients is Narita Airport, one of the two major airports here in Tokyo. Basically, when you log into the Wi-Fi, it automatically also connects you to the chatbot, and the chatbot basically tries to help you in anything you might need around the airport. So you can find restaurants, you can ask it how to get to your hotel, you can ask it about details for your flight, and so on. So we have a few international airports already. We have smaller hotels using the system, but also cities are using the system, especially right now. We have a lot of bots that help with coronavirus related information where you can basically ask the bot news, travel restrictions, any other things you have to consider, important emergency hotlines, these kind of things. So that's what I really just started very, very recently. That's probably a much longer answer than you were expecting, but
No,
that's
no,
a
no,
very
no.
rough nutshell.
I don't know what experience I need to ask you because you've got such a long list of experience. So let me start with your PhD first.
Mm,
So everyone will be interested to know, like, what is quantum information theory is in a nutshell,
right.
and why did it pique your interest, and then how
Mm,
did that help your transition into more AI and NLP?
yep. Good question. I mean, basically, quantum information theory. Well, the most common way in which people probably heard about it is through quantum computing or quantum cryptography. And essentially, the idea is, can we use quantum systems which behave in a very, very different way from the normal everyday world, or what physicists call the classical world? Can we use their properties to do useful information processing tasks, and tasks that could not be done in any other way? So yeah, the most common or the most prominent example is quantum computing. But I was actually working in a different subfield, which is probably not so well known outside of the science community, which is called, well, quantum thermodynamics. So thermodynamics is a study of heat and energy, and how do you convert heat into other useful forms of energy. And like, it started all in the Industrial Revolution with steam engines and stuff, but we're now studying these systems at a quantum scale. And why that's related to information is actually quite interesting, because information and energy are in some ways very strongly linked and interchangeable. There's even these ideas of information engines, so you can convert information into energy. And also, to erase information, you actually need to use energy. So in theory, computers would be able to run completely energy free, reversible, if it wasn't for the energy erasure, information erasure. That's actually what, at least theoretically, is the only necessary energy cost. And yeah, in many different ways, information and energy are very closely linked. And I was also interested in the role of time in all of this, because if you think about, well, engines, for example, an engine always said something needs to be moving, or engines create motion. But to think about motion, you need an idea of what is time. So I was very interested in the idea, okay, how do clocks work in those quantum scale engines? And yeah, that's basically what I did during my PhD. It probably sounds a lot more, well, groundbreaking and exciting than it was. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but it was very, very abstract. It was very mathematical. Like, most of the time, I didn't even use a computer. It was purely pen and paper and just abstract maths and building theories. So I did enjoy that, but I wanted to just have some more impact in the real world and solve real world problems. And I think, well, as I said, kind of AI seemed like the right topic to go into in deep learning, just because it opened up such a huge variety of topics that could be solved. But also, I think as a quantum information theorist, the core maths you're using is really, really deep linear algebra.
Mhm.
And if you look at neural networks, basically it is just also another form of linear algebra. So there was also very close overlap with the types of math tools that were used in the two fields. I don't think that's what inspired me to make that transition, but it definitely made it a lot easier for me. And also, again, information theory is actually used in a lot of neural networks. So for those who are into the deep learning, I really like working with variational autoencoders, and they're, for me, just an information theoretically really, really beautiful framework. And it really, the concept boils down to information theory for me. So there were definitely quite a few overlaps that made that work quite well. And yeah, I did enjoy the transition, and I'm happy I made it.
Wow, that's really some journey. Like the link between information and from what you explained. I remember when I did my bachelor's in physics,
Mm,
when I was studying the relativity theory, and then it explained like Einstein thinking about if you traveled at the speed of light, how did that affect time? I just
mm,
went back to that. That memory came when you talked about how time how you can incorporate time in all of this as well. So it's really, really intriguing to know about this. I'll definitely read some more topics on that. So it's really interesting the way you said it. Um, so thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned that on your LinkedIn, like your particular strength is in bridging the gap between technical and business-oriented teams and conveying difficult concepts to non-experts and clients. Um, can you please explain what does that look like?
Sure, absolutely. I think for me, realizing that that's a particular skill of mine, and already started doing my PhD. I was in an incredibly good group, with surrounded by amazing people and amazing scientists, most of who were, I'd say, were better researchers than I was. But I realized that my skill, like I have the skill for presenting my research better than the average physicist. And it turned out that my, let's say, average research skills combined with my skills of actually presenting my research and explaining it to other people was actually more valuable in some ways than the pure, like really, really high pure research skills of others. And I think I just carried that on into later working in AI and startups. And I mean, the first company I joined, as I said, we were developing, or the thing I was working on were these NLP systems for big text data set analysis. And it started out as a little prototype I made because at the time no one in the company was doing NLP. So we just said, hey, let's play around. I can just see what's out there currently, what we can do. And then from my little experiments and prototypes, I just saw, okay, this is what can be done right now. Let's actually try and solve some use case of an existing client from a different project. And it slowly started from there, and I started building this team around me. And really, I realized there's many other people who are better at very narrow things. There's much better. I'm definitely not a traditional engineer, for example. I can't write production level code. But I can understand someone else's production level code or understand what they explain to me about this. And I can then link it to the business needs or the product needs, or also connect it with the research side. So I just realized that my particular strength is really connecting other people's strengths. They can be very narrow in what they're doing and can be experts in that. But I can actually help them connect that. And I think that's a really valuable thing, and it's also quite a rare thing, to be honest. And the biggest problems I've seen in the past in companies in AI and deep learning, there's always been a very big disconnect between the sales side and the product side and the research and development side on the other. And the communication between those two is often not so good. And also that's where a lot of the problems are stemming through. Like the sales side are people who directly understanding the client and the client's needs and also selling stuff to them. If they can't convey that correctly to the research side and development side, that's a huge issue. Also, often what I've seen is because they don't really understand what's technologically possible, salespeople tend to promise way too much to a client and don't want to say no to something that actually doesn't make sense, which then in the long term causes a lot of trouble for the development and engineering side. And yeah, I just realized it's very good to sit in between those. And it's just very well matched with my particular skill set. So that's what I've been spending most of my career so far, leading the development side and leading the research side, but not in a micromanagement thing. Everyone on my team is much better at what they're doing than I am at that particular task, but I can connect the different things and connect it to the overall business vision.
Yeah, that's really, really great, like, because in most enterprises, that's where the problem lies, isn't it? Like everyone works in silos and then not speaking to each other.
Yeah,
The data science team might develop something,
absolutely.
but the manager would want something else, and the sales people would have promised something else. So
Yeah,
it's really essential that there is that link and everyone understands like what each of us are doing as a team. So what you're doing is
yeah,
really, really important to organizations, and it really, really increase
yeah. I think especially organizations doing something technologically complex, because it's very difficult for a non-technical person like a salesperson to fully understand what the thing is and what it can do, and especially what it cannot do. So I think that's really critical to communicate well between those teams.
Yes, yeah. So that is one of the things that any new starter or beginners that coming into this field should be thinking about as well, isn't it? Like, don't just think about like, okay, what cool model I can use or what
Yeah,
algorithm I can use. Always think about the big picture, isn't it? Like, how I can impact and make a bigger impact within the company. Things like, so how important is that sort of mentality in your opinion?
yeah, it's difficult because I think for me that's definitely what I'm good at. But there's also I'm very glad that there are people who can go very, very narrow and can go very deep. But I would definitely agree with you. If you have to choose between one of the two, especially early on, I would definitely recommend going broad and trying to understand as many different things as possible, and also actually taking your time with that. Don't rush into it. Like, I think a lot of people right now going into the field are really like, oh my God, now is the time to go into this. I need to rush, rush, rush and do something very, very quick. But I would really discourage that kind of attitude. I think we're still very, very early in this AI, data science, deep learning age. And yeah, just take it slow, kind of survey the landscape, figure out what you're good at. And it might be being this connector between different things. And I think there's a lot of value because also there's not that many people out there going after that or who are good at that. But it might also be that you're just a super, super highly skilled person at one particular thing. But it's much better realizing that after you survey the landscape than going super narrow early on and then kind of being stuck in your very, very narrow domain.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. Like, it's good to have a deep understanding about something, but always also at the same time make sure that you have a broad sense of
Totally.
what other fields are there or what other technologies are
Yeah.
there. And then as you go up, you can, if you want, you can just specialize in just one area and then go
Yeah.
down the road. But as starters, it's always good to have that broader knowledge. So yeah, very, very good advice. Thank you for sharing that. Um, your new book. You're a co-author of the new book called Time Off. So everyone will be interested to know what is it about and who should be reading it.
Sure. Thanks for asking. And the title is Time Off, a practical guide to building your rest ethic and finding success without the stress. And as the title suggests, it is really about time off in its many different forms and how they're actually very, very important, not just for being rested and recovered, but also for being productive and especially being productive in the creative field. So, maybe one of the key insights behind this is that busy and productive are absolutely not the same, especially when you're doing creative work. And the book looks at many different aspects of time off. So there's a chapter on sleep, there's a chapter on solitude, a chapter on creativity, a chapter on travel, all these different things. And it basically gives you the scientific backgrounds and stories and facts around those. But then in between those, there are also, I think, around 40 different profiles of people, both historic as well as present, who found success because they used time off as a very deliberate tool. And each of those profiles comes with a very practical advice at the end to the reader saying, hey, try to implement that particular person's form of time off and see if you can find success in that way. And that whole thing is then also wrapped. So at the very beginning, we actually look at a bit of a history of work and leisure. Because if you look at ancient Rome and Greece, for example, for them, leisure was basically the highest thing you could aspire to. It was filled their lives with meaning, and they saw this as something really productive and valuable. But then over the centuries, we came to basically the opposite view now. Now we pride ourselves in how busy we are, and if you take time off, most people feel really, really guilty about that. But it's really so backwards. Because if you think about like the field we're in, data science, AI, is all about automation. And the things that are going to be automated first, that's busy work. And no one's going to be out busy the AI, no matter how hard they work. But what's left after that is going to be the very human skills. And we have more and more time to focus on those human skills, particularly creativity and empathy. And those are skills that really need you to take time off seriously and need you to, well, recover and be well rested. And also the big breakthrough ideas, if you look at most of history's biggest achievements, they were all done in times of time off, because incubation of ideas is extremely important. And for creativity, you really need to connect those distant dots. But you only get into that kind of mindset if you actually take time away from those very narrow domains again, kind of going back. If you're too stuck in a problem, you're not going to have those big breakthrough ideas. They really happen in this downtime, in this incubation time. So at the very end of the book, we actually look at what we think is going to be the future of work, and also why time off is such a key skill. And it is a skill, it is something that needs to be practiced. Time off is not just watching Netflix all day, for example. That's also why we call it rest ethic, because you really need to develop it. And just like a work ethic, you need to hone it, and you need to protect your rest and have high quality rest. But if you practice that, it's going to be really a key skill in the future of work, and it's going to allow you to thrive alongside AI. Actually, the whole final chapter opens with an AI related story. It's actually David Silver. He's the lead researcher behind DeepMind's AlphaGo and AlphaZero. And the main algorithm behind AlphaZero actually came to him in a sudden flash of inspiration in a moment of downtime. He was on honeymoon, just sitting there, completely relaxed, and suddenly that idea for the algorithm comes to him. And yeah, it's about many of these different examples, and really just the value of time off in general. I think it's a book that really can be read by everyone, and everyone can find something useful in it. We also don't believe that there's a one size fits all approach. So probably some of the examples in the book speak to some people, where some speak to others. And we really encourage people to try everything, but then just find what works for them. But who we really hope to reach in the end are leaders, because they can make a big impact on their company culture. And we really hope that they realize that being a leader who embraces time off, both for themselves, but also for their teams, is going to have a huge impact on productivity, motivation, company culture, all these different things. I mean, probably everyone who's been working long enough knows a really, really bad leader, someone who's reactive, who's easy to anger, who just doesn't understand their team. Often those are exactly the same kind of people who are super proud of how busy they are and how little sleep they need. So I think to be an effective leader, you really need to embrace time off as a key skill and as something that you and your team needs.
Yeah, it's really. I'm really intrigued by what you said, and then I definitely will be buying that book, because I always think like there are tons and tons of books about how to be productive, how
Yep.
to achieve this, achieve that, but there's not enough books about resting, or the importance of sleep. Things
Mm.
like, anyone watching this, make sure you to check out that book, buy if you can, and then read it.
It's
Thank you.
also absolutely beautiful thanks to the illustrations by our illustrator. So actually it's full on the inside as well of lots of, every profile has like a little picture. I'm really, really proud of how it turned out in the end. And yeah, largely thanks to the amazing work done by our illustrator.
Yeah, right. That's great. So any beginners or anyone who started their journey, make sure you read that book. It's really important. Like as much as you want to get productive, you also want to make sure that you are learning things in the right way, taking time off, and then that'll make you like perform in your optimal level, and then achieve even more success. So that will lead on to my next question regarding like you have such a vast experience, and then you have a degree in physics, then you went on to do a PhD, then you are working in R&D, you were an entrepreneur. So someone who are starting out on a journey, on a learning journey, what will
Mm.
want to know like what are the best ways to like learn complex skills and retain information like what are the lifestyle choices, things to avoid, so that they can learn things, complex skills, and retain that information in their mind for future use.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, time off in general is such a big impact. And I know a lot of the big things I have achieved were thanks to taking time off, not in spite of taking time off, but it's really because I had so much time away from things and took things in such a leisurely way that I actually did achieve them. So again, it kind of comes back to my PhD days. Actually, I was extremely lucky with my supervisors. They gave me a lot of freedom in the way I did want to work. And that's really where I realized, hey, actually, I can get a lot of stuff done by not always being busy. Um, I was always experimenting with a lot of different things. And again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. It's good to have some skills where you're deep, but I think it really, really helps, at least to some extent, to go broad and explore a lot of different things. If you're working in any creative field, and I think developers are extremely creative, even they might not see themselves that way, or business people, like writing a business plan is a very creative exercise in a way, and they are artists just as much as painters. They just use different mediums, business plans, codes, whatever. So everyone who's working in a creative field, I think, really benefits from that breadth, because if you think, where do your best ideas come from, they often don't come from within a single domain, but they come from you connecting something different to a new topic. So follow your interests, even if you think it's a waste of time, because you never know where the next big inspiration comes from. One of the examples, there's a story in the book of, actually, it was a deep learning idea I had. I was struggling with a problem. For those who know a little bit about deep learning, I was looking at latent spaces. And essentially, latent spaces are not flat, so they're warped in strange ways, but it's not always obvious how. But distances there are not always the same everywhere. So I was trying to find a way of how to flatten those spaces out so that distances become more meaningful. And I was struggling with that problem for a couple of months, and I just couldn't find a way to solve it. And the final idea actually came to me on a weekend trip with a friend of mine, where we were just hiking and not thinking about work at all. And we were looking at some random map, some hand drawn map. And my friend mentioned something, hey, isn't it interesting that things that are more important are drawn in a bigger way on the map? And that's when it hit me, that idea that in cartography, you have these things called cartograms, where certain areas are represented depending on their size, for example, GDP or agricultural output, you scale them up or down. And I realized in that moment that, hey, I can apply the same technique from cartography to those latent spaces. So in so many different instances, and it's not just personal, but also other people's stories we highlight in the book, so many times those big breakthroughs come to you during times of rest. So I can really, really encourage to, yes, rest. And also, especially in those rest moments, that's where your brain pulls ideas from all these different areas. If you're too stuck in one problem, you're only going to focus on that particular problem. You can't pull in ideas from different areas. But if you have wide set of interests, and then allow your brain this good, high quality incubation time, that's really, I think, where creativity comes in. Another big thing for me personally is reading. I start my mornings without any technology. So actually, that's also something I recommend to people in general. Switch off your phones as much as possible. My mornings are usually internet free unless I know I have a meeting or something else planned. And I use it just for deep thinking and reading. Um, and only afterwards I turn on my email and everything and have the world flood me with information. So I think that's a really, really important thing as well. And in general, I just recommend, don't stress so much. I know it's easier said than done. Again, that's why we call it a rest ethic. It's something that needs to be developed and learned. But I think a lot of people are trying to accomplish too much in a very short time, but because of that, then actually sacrificing long-term progress, right?
Mhm.
I I'm not a very fast learner at the beginning. Like a lot of people always think, oh, because you're doing so many different things, you must be a really fast learner. But actually, it takes me quite a long time initially to get into something. But I can't remember. There's this quote, I think is attributed to Abraham Lincoln or something. If you give him 10 hours to fell a tree, he spends the first 9.5 hours just sharpening his axe and only the last half hour to actually fell the tree, something like that. I think people need to kind of focus on the basics, take it easy, take a calm approach to it. You'll benefit in the long run. And yeah, it's really a marathon, not a sprint. I think that applies to most things, but especially if you're just getting started in data science. Too many people rush into it way too quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Some really, really important tips like the more successful people that I speak to, the more this trend comes on where they say like they don't use any technology in the morning. Some people, like even like yourself, you said like it's better to contact you via email, not through LinkedIn, because you probably don't check social media that much.
No,
So it's really important. And another thing that always comes up is reading. Um, so it's really important. Like make sure that your brain need that space.
no,
Don't jam it with all this information overload where you always checking your phone, you chasing that notification, and you're always watching TV or things like that. You need that offline time, isn't it? Like to recharge, and
absolutely.
that's when. And like you said about the time off, the ideas might only come to you where you are not thinking about it, and then you're relaxing, and then
No,
you are doing something else. So it's really important to have a lifestyle where you are taking good time off,
no,
not using too much of information overloading the way of social media, and then make sure you are reading, and then like you said, take it slow, don't stress, and then don't try to boil the ocean, isn't it? That's
absolutely.
everything in a nutshell.
Actually, also one more thing. I think probably the most important form of rest and time off is just sleep. So many people are just not sleeping enough. And I think that's so critical for any kind of performance, mental, physical, and also for learning. Like there's nothing that's more critical for your learning performance. If you sleep after learning, whether that's a good night's full sleep or just a nap, it really kind of hits the save button on those things you just learned. And the same way, sleeping before you start learning, it really prepares your mind to actually be focused and also be able to really absorb that material. So really take your sleep seriously and don't like cut corners there in any way.
So just a bit intrigued, like how many hours do you sleep?
I'm actually like, I know if I sleep less than 8 hours, it's not going to be a great day. If I sleep less than 7 hours, it's going to be a completely useless day. So I like to get my 9 hours of sleep. It's not always happening. I mean, even though I wrote a book on rest ethic, my rest ethic is still far from perfect. And I think it's always going to be a continuously evolving process and a continuous learning process. But I try to aim for 9 hours if possible.
So do you go to bed early and wake up early, or do you stay late and
No.
wake up late, or
Yeah, I'm
what's
really
your
not a morning
standard?
person.
Okay.
I struggle with mornings. So I think usually I've gotten much, much better. During my PhD days, it was I would go to bed at like 3 a.m. and sleep till noon or something. Now it's become more normal, kind of going to bed around midnight, getting up around 9 a.m. That's sort of my schedule now. But also, I prepare for my sleep. Like it's kind of, again, no, I switch off my computer like a couple of hours before. I turn my phone on mode. And actually, in the evening, again, I read. Like maybe it goes into too much detail, but in the morning I read nonfiction specifically. So that's kind of my learning process in a way. And in the evening I read fiction because it helps my brain just kind of shut down from problem solving mode and switch into this more story mode, kind of getting ready for dreaming. But even I think a lot of stuff is to be learned from good fiction. And especially if we're again talking about the not just technical skills, but you can learn a lot of leadership skills from reading fiction. You can learn empathy from reading fiction because you have to think yourself into other people. So actually, yeah, fiction is also a really, really great thing. If people think it's a waste of time, I would disagree with that.
Yeah. So do a lot of reading, do a bit of don't just always read educational stuff, or read fiction as well, so you can learn so much from it. Get your at least 9 hours sleep every day, and then careful with your social media. And then that is in a nutshell. You did PhD, and then you did a lot of research. So um, people would be when once they've done a master's, a lot of people would be confused, like, okay, should I do a PhD,
Mm.
or should I start applying for jobs? So, what is your advice to people while how what things should they consider in making that decision whether to do a PhD or not? And also, if they've chosen to go down that route of PhD, what can they do to make that journey enjoyable and successful?
Mm. It's a good question, also quite a difficult question, actually, because I think it is quite personal in a way. And also, I'm not sure if I'm necessarily the best person to answer this because I think things are changing so quick. Back, I don't know, I got into AI and deep learning maybe 5, 6 years ago, which sounds like a very, very short time, but things have somehow completely changed since then. Um, I mean, back then there were not really any degree programs aimed at those fields.
Yeah,
You like basically everyone who came into the field came through some different route, like physics
yeah,
or other types of math, engineering, something. I mean, right now there's so many programs suddenly aimed specifically at data scientists, machine learning engineers, AI engineers. So I think that's a very different situation now. In general, I think PhD or not, it also really depends on what you want to achieve, what's your environment, what opportunities do you have. Um, I think if you want to go down, if you think you're more on the research side and if you really enjoy research, and you can find a good group you think you might like working with, definitely go for it. I mean, finding a good group is very, very key, and I would really recommend auditing the group in a way before. I mean, it's hard to say because a lot of people are struggling to get an offer in the first place. But if you have the luxury of comparing different groups, definitely try and figure out if you'd actually enjoy the environment of the group, not just the research goals set by the people, but really do you click with the people, with your supervisors, with the other group members, because I think that's so important. And a PhD can be a very long time, so you want to make sure that you enjoy the environment, and that's also really going to help you make a lot of progress. If you if it's the right kind of environment and if you actually enjoy the research, I think it can be a tremendously valuable experience, not just because of the things you learn, but also I think during a PhD, it's the right time to exactly go broad and not go too deep. Sure, you have a very clear and often quite narrow research goal, but you also have a lot of freedom. You don't have to answer kind of clients' needs or investors' needs or anything. You also don't have the problems of, say, someone later stage in academia, a professor, a postdoc who's got teaching responsibilities, grant responsibilities. So you have a lot of freedom during a PhD, and you should really make sure to use that to explore, both within your own field, but also, again, just explore wider hobbies, interests, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, I also don't think everyone should do a PhD. If you think you're more practically driven and if you have a very clear problem you want to solve, or if you have a very nice opportunity in a company you think you can actually learn a lot in and contribute a lot, then I think that can also be absolutely the right choice. So I really don't think there's a one size fits all answer. Figure out what are your options and then just really spend some time off and really reflect on those things and think through kind of where do you think your strengths are, where do you think your weaknesses are, what do you think you want to get out of this, and how do those different things align with what you want. This might be quite disappointing advice, but yeah, that's really my recommendation. You have to think it through.
yeah. That's really a great tips there. Like, if you're thinking of going down the PhD route just because you think like that's gonna get you a much better pay, then don't do that. Only go down that route if you really are interested in doing that. and then some other good tips as well, like try to get understand the group better if you can have that choice before going down the route, and also make that journey enjoyable, and then go broad as well as going deep, and then, like you said, make that decision, having a bit of time off, and then make that decision to go down that route. So it's all comes down to like how much you want to go down that route, isn't it? And then make that journey. So thanks for sharing that. So I would really like to ask more and more questions, but we almost reached our end of our interview. So if you were asked to give one advice to anyone starting on this journey into data science, what would that be?
Well, actually, I think before giving them advice, I'd ask them a question.
Okay.
Why do you think you want to get into data science?
Yeah.
I think right now, way too many people are rushing into the field, maybe just because they think that's the right field to go into, or that's the right field to make a lot of money. But my first question would really be like, what's your motivation for going into the field? Again, sit down and actually reflect on that. And if you still think, yes, that's what you want to do, which is great. I'm not saying people shouldn't. I just don't think everyone should. Then I think then my advice would really be take it slow, especially in the beginning. Try to explore the field as widely as possible. Before narrowing down in one particular domain, just explore. And also learn things in a way where you're working on projects you actually care about. Don't just follow one tutorial after another, but try and see, hey, is there some problem you'd like to solve no one else has been working on? Or maybe someone's even solved it, but you want to redo it in your own way. And then use those kind of projects to learn, because you're going to be so much more motivated. You're going to learn so much more because you're actually solving a real problem and not just following someone else's tutorials. And you're also getting a much better understanding of those kind of more product related things, not just purely code, but also how do you actually solve a real world problem? How do you satisfy someone's needs? So I guess that's maybe more than one advice, but that's sort of the direction I would go in.
Yeah, definitely. So it all comes down to like what we said before, isn't it? Like don't go ask yourself like why you want to do it. Not don't choose that path if you think like there's a hype, or there's like, or I could get a better pay. That shouldn't be your reason to get into this field. And again, great points on what you said. Like there are different roles. Data science is not just about data scientists. It's about there's lots of other options you can explore, like machine learning engineer, data analyst, lots of other options. So understand like which path you want to take. Explore what jobs they are doing in each of their roles, and then take it from there.
And I think even if you end up specializing in one of those roles later, having explored the other ones a bit more really helps you work with those kind of people, because you actually know what they're doing, you know what their problems are, you know what they're struggling with, and you know how to communicate well with them. So I think, again, it's absolutely not wasted time. It might seem like you're starting off slower, but actually you're going to benefit massively from it in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And then take that time off to make that decision as well. Like thank you very much for coming on the show, Max. It was really great to have you. I learned a lot from you, and everyone watching, make sure you go and buy that Time Off book. It's really worth it from what I've learned from Max. So make sure you have a copy of that, and make sure you follow Max on LinkedIn as well. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.